Sergio Leone and Margaretthe von Trotta are two directors and auteurs who create what are thought to be gendered works. When considering Leone and von Trotta in relation to each other, one can see that through their differing styles of filmmaking, that there is a gender divide that occurs as the ways in which gender is performed on screen is vastly different. Leone infuses extreme drama and violence into his films with male characters that are emotionally underdeveloped, while von Trotta uses ugly and realistic violence that never takes center stage with the characters that mature and develop throughout the screen time. To compare one of Sergio Leone's works to one of Margaretthe von Trotta's, two films that show the contrast between the two directors' works, specifically in regard to how their characters perform their genders, one could look at Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America versus von Trotta's Marianne and Julienne. The plot of Once Upon a Time in America follows Noodles, played by Robert De Niro, throughout three distinct stages of his life. In childhood, as a delinquent who is trying to make some money learning the ways of the streets, a young adult who is fully invested in a life of crime and was spending his youth trying to advance his personal success, and as the reformed gentleman who has learned the error of his ways and is trying to come to terms with the death of his old friends and business partners, though he is unable to fully leave the life of crime he led behind him. Von Trotta's Marianne and Julienne follows two sisters who are both struggling to find what exactly their part in the fight for the right to abortion and women's rights in Germany. Julienne is a conservative journalist who is campaigning for women's rights to abortion. In her mind, the proper way to fight for change in the society is through well-thought-out arguments, factual reporting of the social events around them. Marianne, on the other hand, is a violent revolutionist who only sees revolutionary terrorism as a way to show her government her dissatisfaction and the needs for change in their society. The dynamic of the sisters, Marianne and Julienne, is, while they do have their differences, there are very different beliefs on how change should be enacted. Both of their fights are concerned with the betterment of the society and creating social change that will benefit all women. Julienne uses her position as a reporter to spread her views and beliefs about women's civil rights and speaks for those without a voice, whereas Marianne acts for those who can't act through her social justice terrorism. While there's no way to determine which of them are right, they both are fighting for a cause larger than themselves as individuals. While his film expresses the sentiment that many young individuals were feeling at the time after World War II, it represents the split in ideologies that were present, as while Leone's film represents a single-channel view of the issue. This differs from Once Upon a Time in America, as throughout the film, even in their oldest state, all the characters in the film are self-interested and are operating on the same principles and values that they had when they were children. When Noodles is a child, the first time he has sex is with a woman he knows, but she's being paid to have sex with him from a police officer, as their form of blackmail, determining for them from a young age that sex for them is not an act of romance, but is just in the pursuit of ejaculation. This scene is mimicked in his young adult life when he loves this other woman and wants to have sex with her, but he forces himself upon her, rapes her, and drives her away from him. This shows that he possesses the same immaturity he had in his younger life and is incapable of love or compassion and only cares about his raw primal instincts, as shown in the common theme amongst many other Sergio Leone characters. While their stories are interesting, many of them operate on very simplistic needs for characters to fulfill, whether it be sex, killing, enacting revenge, being wealthy. The actions of his characters are typically single-dimensioned and in pursuit of a personal gain, as opposed to von Trotta's characters who have empathy and the dimension in order to think for others, as their films very explicitly are political and are speaking directly to larger themes in current events, as opposed to being expressive of the male gender stereotypes of being violent and lustful as seen in Leone's films, specifically Once Upon a Time in America. In John Fowell's book on the critical reception and criticism of Sergio Leone's filmography, he expresses the difficulty that many female audiences might have with his films. In the fifth chapter of the book, he opens up by trying to tackle Leone's first woman character, Jill. The first sentence of this chapter reads, "It would be an understatement to say that Leone is not a women's director." As problematic as the statement may be, it is true that Leone's works are primarily concerned with expressing the primal wants, typically classified as traditionally male-dominant. In the image of masculinity that the media portrays to us and have people believe is that men are self-sufficient, dominant, and care only about their personal achievement and are oblivious to the world around them. While this is not entirely true, in order to appeal to the traditionally masculine audience, Sergio Leone takes these qualities and amplifies them to reach a point of hypermasculinity. The way the films deal with memory in their respective ways is also vastly different. While Once Upon a Time in America uses memory in order to show how Noodles is very set in his ways, despite his accomplishments, hardships, and the decades of time that pass, he will always be the same guy. Von Trotta's Marianne and Julienne uses memory to display a cultural moment in regards to how the struggle that Marianne and Julienne are facing is supposed to equate to that that many young liberals were facing in the post-World War II era. Many, if not all of them, demanded change from their government. However, whether or not they should be violent or not was very split amongst the population, as is shown explicitly between the relationship of Julienne, who believes in abiding by the law to get what she wants, and Marianne, who believes in the contrary.
To say that Leone uses excess amounts of violence in his films is somewhat of an understatement. Bloody shootouts litter his films, especially the Dollars trilogy. The men in these films constantly use violence to solve their problems and assert their dominance over those around them. In Leone's West, violence is commonplace, and those who carry out this extreme force most proficiently garner the respect of those around them. The sheer number of scenes where men are seen enacting violence through these films begins to dull the effect of such actions. In some cases, it serves as a morbid comedy. As in this scene, the man with no name jokes to the coffin maker that he will need to build an extra 3 more before wiping out a group of men.
Get 3 coffins ready.
Huh?
My mistake. 4 coffins.
For Leone, brutality begins to mold the society around it, as people quite literally begin to live off the deaths of others. Violence is further trivialized in how the characters in Leone's works purposefully create and add tension to the acts of cruelty. Routinely, those involved revel in the fighting and draw out the moments as long as possible. The chief example of this comes from the final shootout in Leone's 1966 epic, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. For context, at this point in the film, the man with no name is the only one of the 3 who knows which grave the money is buried. Instead of simply shooting Tuco when he sneaks up on him, he prolongs their time together by getting him to dig up the grave. When Angel Eyes catches him off guard, he devises a way to have a fair fight by writing the name of the gravestone on the bottom of a rock and places it in the middle of a large open area. The 2 follow, and an extensive scene takes place that continuously builds the tension for over 2 minutes before they finally make a move. I'm not kidding, it's over 2 minutes of this. This demonstrates how frivolous the violence is, as the scene is highly stylized. It doesn't exist in a reality where these men could simply shoot each other, or at least not wait so long to make a move. Unlike von Trotta's use of violence, this is drawn out, unnecessary, and unrealistic, and it adds to the drama of the scene to entertain and titillate instead of displaying mere information. This scene, when compared to one of von Trotta's shootouts, is extremely different, as where Leone focuses on gratifying the audience after a tense buildup, von Trotta alternatively uses realistic and gritty violence to further establish the impact of said violence. Take this scene at the end of her 1975 directorial debut, The Lost Honor of Katrina Blum. For context, at this point in the film, Katrina has been terrorized and publicly shamed for her personal relationship to a suspected terrorist. One reporter in particular has led the tirade of slander against her, and finally they have come face to face. He approaches and begins to verbally harass her as the threat of sexual assault grows. When the gun is revealed to Werner, he begins to back away, almost as if he believes that a dramatic scene will take place, that he isn't in inherent danger yet. But without hesitation, Katrina fires, and Werner looks shocked to have actually been hit. It then hard cuts, and as quickly as it showed the violence, it moves away from it. Here, the contrast between these 2 directors shines through, as von Trotta opts to use violence in her film not as a central entertainment, but to demonstrate the ugliness of violence. This murder is highly realistic, and does not seek to add unnecessary tension, but delivers a poignant message about corruption and the struggles women face when exposed to the public eye. When comparing these two films, questions of gender begin to surface, as one might ponder why violence is shown so differently between a male and female director. Studies conducted by the Journal of Adolescent Health found that young adult males are consistently being exposed to violent films and in many cases are the target audience of said films. This, combined with the stereotype perception that males are interested in violence more than women, might begin to explain their differing approaches to violence and gender on screen. Furthermore, the fact that Leone uses heightened drama and violence frivolously exhibits the fact that film is primarily an entertainment medium for males, as the surplus of male directors and stories indicate the ability to take narrative and creative leaps. Von Trotta, on the other hand, does not use the film medium to entertain, but rather inform audiences of messages she deems important. The subject matter takes on a greater importance, as it is created more seriously and thus demonstrates the difference between the two directors. In Julia Knight's article, Is There a Feminine Aesthetic?, the concept that women bring differing aspects to filmmaking is discussed. Since most of the power within society is dominated by males, media is primarily targeted, marketed, and made by men. Thus, when women begin to create their own stories, they create a female aesthetic, as they inherently view the world through a different gaze. Clearly, once one begins to compare the works of Leone and von Trotta, one can see their differing approaches concerning how their characters perform gender and violence. While Leone engages with a hypermasculine audience interested in gratifying violence, von Trotta consistently addresses the cultural anxieties of her time through emotionally developed characters. Perhaps this difference in authorship comes not only from their biological gender, but is also infused by the socio and political institutions of their respected times.